Hello, everybody, and welcome to Storytelling, Philosophy, and Reception. And today we have Peter Campbell from Cranfield University. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Now, Peter is an, should I call you an underwater? What is your what is that called? That particular field?
Yeah, underwater archaeology or maritime archaeology. So I work with human engagement with water. It can be shipwrecks and sunken cities, but also kind of rivers and water sources and all types of engagement with water.
And you've done every sort of study at this point, right? And you've worked with different.
Yeah, I've seen and found everything there is, so there's nothing left. No need for anyone else to go looking.
What else is there?
Yeah, so I work on shipwrecks and sunken cities, also in underwater caves of different types, lots of rivers and lakes, and everything. Not just ships but also aircraft. I work broadly in the Mediterranean, but on every different time period and everything like that.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So beginning is the main thing. Like let's just start someplace. So I'm going to give you a starting point. Here we go. As you know, I've been reading the Iliad and singing the Iliad. I'm on line 208. I just finished line 284 from book 1. I have 24 more books to go, Peter. So, you can come back as a guest another time and talk another time. So what is the earliest with the farthest back in time relic that you found in the Mediterranean?
So in the Mediterranean, the earliest is a 7th century BC shipwreck,
Wow.
which we found in Forni in Greece, which is an archipelago where we found the largest concentration of ancient shipwrecks in the Mediterranean. Now, we had hoped to find a Bronze Age shipwreck, and I'm sure there's one there somewhere, but we have not found it yet. But this is a small archipelago that's largely forgotten by history. And we started a project there in 2015 based on some accounts by sponge divers and spear fishermen, and they reported finding ceramics in the sea. Now you get this all over the Mediterranean, people reporting finding things in the ocean, of course, because there's so much history underwater. And so we were expecting to find one or two shipwrecks like you do on pretty much every island in the Aegean and all over the Mediterranean. But the hit rate for these reports was much, much higher than elsewhere. So, usually you expect like 10 to 30% of reported finds to be shipwrecks, and the rest are just like an amphora here and amphora there, which are these kind of big ceramic jugs. They were used to transport wine and fish sauce and that sort of thing. They were kind of like the barrels of antiquity. And so you find, odd bits. There's lots of things in the sea, and not everything's a shipwreck. But we dove on the very first dive where the sponge diver said, and we found a wreck. And then we went to the second spot and dove there. And he reported finding another. He said there's another wreck there, but he hadn't been there in 30 years. So we dove down, and we immediately saw a scatter that was the size of a wreck of late Roman amphora. And we kept swimming. And then all of a sudden we found a huge pile of amphoras from Sinope on the Black Sea coast that dated to a century later. And we kept swimming. We ended up finding 4 more wrecks along that path. So we actually, over the first 2 dives, we found 7 shipwrecks. But little did we piece it all together, like the whole picture. And so that season we ended up finding 21 shipwrecks in just 10 days. And then we thought we had found all of them. We went back the next year, we found 22, and then now we're up to 58. So it's just this incredible little archipelago forgotten to history. But in terms of the maritime landscape, if you're a sailing vessel, it's really an important location. You kind of have to sail by there if you're in the Eastern Aegean. And so just over the centuries, lots of shipwrecks piled up there. So potentially, the fleets described in the Iliad passed by this area on their way to Asia Minor.
What were the main ports, you think? A few of them.
So, uh, we have the names of the major cities in the areas, but on Forney there were no ports or anything. I mean, there's some small settlements, but really this is just an island group that's important for navigation, but it's not a major place where there were settlements or anything like that. So I mean, it had a name in antiquity, Corsai. It had small villages. I mean, there's a foundation stone for a statue of the Emperor Augustus. There's a fortress, and there's a temple base that's probably a temple to Poseidon. It's been hypothesized, and that sort of thing, but not a large population center. So really, the reason why we're finding all these wrecks and they're kind of scattered all over the place, it's a result of the weather conditions, the sea state, this sort of thing. But they weren't loading and unloading here; they're mostly just passing by. So this is it's a key kind of choke point in the Aegean, between kind of the large city states of Asia Minor and the large city states of the Greek mainland, as well as kind of the island centers of Samos, Icaria, Rhodes. If you're going to these places, you pass by Forney.
That is kind of the unfortunate thing, right? That the reason you're able to study the wrecks is because they got wrecked.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like studying a history of failure, right? Because these are the ships that didn't make it. So I mean, were they really bad mariners? Were they really bad designed ships? It's hard to say.
That's true. At this point, I mean, you can't really tell, can you? Because they're so badly damaged. You don't know. Can you still tell any reason why they got wrecked? Like, are you able to figure that out?
I mean, that's always one of the really difficult questions because archaeology, the archaeological record is a fragmentary source. So we mostly only have inorganic remains. So things like the amphoras, anchors, ballast stones, these sorts of things that can't get eaten. All the organic things get eaten by shipworms and fish and all the different marine creatures that love love to eat everything that they can that comes from above. And so it's always difficult to say. However, we only have really two wrecks that you can say were like a ship trap, where they were kind of there was a hidden reef that sank them. The rest, the other kind of 56, are sunk kind of within aspects of the maritime landscape where there's kind of currents and winds and waves and that sort of thing. So it's more a function of we can't say for sure why they sank, and we can't say that it's because they were bad sailors. They probably weren't. They were probably quite skilled. We can't say whether or not the ships were really old or poorly designed or anything like that because we don't have enough of the remains. But we can say in general is that we can kind of see the routes that they were traveling, kind of from the Black Sea and North Aegean down into the Levant and Egypt, and then back up, and that they probably were trying to deal with things like very strong southern winds. So in the Aegean, you have kind of two predominant winds. The first one is the Artesian wind, which is kind of this strong northern wind that's very steady, and it's as steady as the trade winds. So that is the wind kind of from June till August that the vast majority of Aegean trade would occur with. And it's very strong but very steady, and so it's perfect for sailing. But you get these periods where the southern wind comes, and the southern wind is what we would call gusty. So it's very strong and unpredictable, and it can come up very quickly. And so a lot of the wrecks that we have are on cliffs and kind of rocky faces that are southern facing. And so probably what happened is they were sailing with the northern wind very steady, and then all of a sudden a southern gale came up and pushed them against the rocks. And that's very common kind of throughout the Eastern Mediterranean to find shipwrecks on the south facing coasts.
I'm listening to all that and I just keep thinking, "Oh my gosh, that is just the coolest thing ever that you go on these dives you're funded to go on these dives. I mean, like people, just would love that job, and look and see and discover. Like how do you even propose such a thing? Like we think that there are things to be found here. How does that even work? Because my students would be so curious to know how to go about doing what you do, Peter.
Yeah, well, I think it's the best job in the world, and I don't know why everybody's not doing it. But yeah, so I mean, there's lots of different models for this sort of approach to finding ancient wrecks. So I mean, with Forney, we spoke to a foundation, the Honor Frost Foundation, and we said, look, there's very good evidence from the sponge divers and spear fishermen that there's wrecks in this area, and we kind of showed them photos and a map and that sort of thing. And we said, would you be interested in funding this? And they gave us an academic research grant for £10,000, and we ended up with 21 wrecks. So I think that's a very good exchange rate of wrecks to funding. And they were very happy, and they've continued to support us in different ways. And but then there's other models as well. So for example, I very frequently work with RPM Nautical Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and that was set up with it's a foundation that has a state-of-the-art research vessel and an endowment, and their only aim is to further maritime archaeological research and education. And so they fully fund these expeditions to just go out and conduct research. And so this is a long-running nonprofit that's worked throughout the Mediterranean, from Spain and Portugal all the way to Israel, working underwater, trying to locate sites and kind of preserve these sites. So there's lots of different models out there. There's also government contracts, so lots of governments are interested in understanding what's on the seafloor. So lots of different kind of funding types and models that people can kind of use to approach searching for shipwrecks.
Now I've seen your, forgive me, but it's cute. The cute roundish. uh, Not okay. It's not a submarine. What is it called? A pod that goes.
Oh, the ROV, the remotely operated vehicle. So it's a robot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we use a couple different robots. The robots are getting super common these days. So primarily we use a remotely operated vehicle. So this is it kind of looks like a little kind of squarish robot that lives in a little cage and gets dropped off the back of the boat, but it weighs about the same as a car. So it looks quite cute, but it's quite heavy. And when it's in the water, it weighs nothing, and it kind of drives around and finds artifacts. And so that's kind of the big one. We have another small one that you can just carry in your hand, and that's also connected to a tether, and it kind of goes down, and then a live feed comes from the robot up into the control room. And then Johnny, our ROV pilot, is kind of flying it around, and we're all watching the screen. But there's also now autonomous underwater vehicles. And so these are kind of untethered robots. So these kind of look like torpedoes, and you throw them in the water, and they kind of follow a route that you've programmed ahead of time, and they search the seafloor, and then they come up and they can call your cell phone, or you can keep an eye out for it. But yeah, robots are becoming more and more common and more affordable. So they're really quite handy for searching the seafloor. And it'll be really exciting when kind of like everybody has them and everyone can kind of chip into searching the ocean bottom.
Have you gone in some sort of submarine or some sort of underwater? I don't know what to call it. Vessel that goes down. Yeah, have you?
I have not. They seem like death traps to me. I can't think of anything worse. I used to work on the HL Hunley, which was the first successful submarine, and that it sank it. It's the first submarine to sink an enemy vessel. And that had a bunch of people trapped inside when it was found on the seafloor. So that sank the Housatonic, the USS Housatonic in the Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, and then sank with 8 people inside. And after working on that, on the human remains and everything, I will never go to submarine. I do not trust them. But yeah, I mean, it's submarines have their uses, but I really like to feel the water and kind of experience it. And so I'd much rather go diving than in a submarine. And also the robots these days can do more than the submarines can. So submarines are kind of being pushed out, unless it's like a really deep wreck and there's really a reason to send a person down. Submarines are expensive. I think they're death traps. There's not a lot of reason to use them. But yeah, they're still around. There's still people that have them and use them, but I think they're more of a kind of fun tourist type thing these days, than kind of used by research, given kind of the advancements in robotics, and kind of a lot of times if there's something delicate on the seafloor that you really need to bring up, there's no replacing kind of human hands. Like the human hand is just incredible for like delicate handling of artifacts.
I was watching some sort of nature show where they have a vessel, and it's like it's really small and it could fit in 3 people, but it's like round, and it goes down pretty deep. And I was going to ask your opinion about that, but okay, since like you feel that way about submarines, I'm all, yeah, you're not going to go in a 3-person thing going all the way down then. Yeah.
Well, there's I have a colleague who tells a hilarious story of he was offered a by a submarine owner to go inspect a shipwreck that he had been working on, and accepted. And it was one of those where it's kind of, the cylinder is an incredibly strong shape. So most of them are sorry, not a cylinder, a sphere. So it's a sphere kind of with the engines attached. And they went down and they were looking at this World War II shipwreck, and they passed underneath the stern, which kind of came out and up, and they got stuck. And so it's these 2 guys who know each other, and then one guy who doesn't, who they don't know so well. And he says he was convinced that they were just thinking like, should we strangle him in order to save air to buy us a bit more time in case somebody comes? And then like slowly the submarine kind of worked its way out, and sediment gave way and they managed to get out. But yeah, after hearing that story, it's not for me. That sounds terrible. That'd be a horrible, horrible way to go.
At least when you're diving, you're thinking you can signal to other divers. You dive together as a team. You're all watching out for each other. You can help each other out.
Exactly. Yeah.
And is that pretty much how you work to? How many divers usually go together?
It depends on the project. We tend to stick in pairs, just because if there's more than 2 keeping a check on each other, then there's a kind of higher probability for somebody losing attention, right? So it's much easier to say, okay, I need to make sure that person keeps breathing, versus I need to keep an eye on these 2 people, because then you can easily focus on one and forget the other. And so we tend to always work in pairs. But there might be multiple pairs working at the same time. So for excavating a shipwreck, for example, we might have several different pairs working with dredges, which are like underwater vacuums, kind of sucking up all the sand at the same time. But yeah, always working in pairs. So I mean, you also have to keep in mind that you can only breathe air underwater, kind of at depth, because of the pressure, for so long per day. Otherwise, you increase chances of the bends, which is the diver's disease, where you build up too much nitrogen in your blood, and it can cause all kinds of, bad impact on your muscles and neurological system, but also aneurysms and things like that. So, yeah, it's you can only really dive, maybe 2-3 times per day. for, I mean, it depends on depth, but for 20 minutes each, something like that. So that means that you have to have lots of divers ready to go if you're going to be getting a full day's work. So, you may have divers diving twice a day for 20 minutes each. And that means that to fill out the full day, you have to have a huge cycle. So, I mean, we can have upwards of 25 to 30 divers working on a project together with support staff on the surface, that sort of thing. So the diving projects, if it's excavation, it can get quite big. But if it's survey, it can be quite small. So we did a survey along the Albanian coast many years ago, looking for shipwrecks along there. And, we'd have a dive team of 5. And that would just be 2 pairs of divers and then a dive safety officer. And we would just kind of jump off the side of the boat, swim a line, pop out. The next team would go in and continue the line and that sort of thing. And that's a very small team, but very effective that way.
Describe a survey because, okay, like just step by step here. What you look to see if there are shipwrecks. There are. Okay, great. Now, who are the specialists you'll need to determine what type of boat you're looking at? Also, once you find something, then you need to call in specialists to look at the ceramics. Or, can you describe that process?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, finding the wreck is an end in and of itself, but then it begins like this whole nother cycle. So yeah, the really cool thing is that you never know what you're gonna find. And often it's never what you expect or would like to find. That's the really cool thing, is that on any given dive, it's like a lotto ticket. Like you don't know what's gonna pop up. So
I'm
or
waiting
a
for an anecdote
scratch
from
ticket.
you. Tell me a story, Peter. Tell me a fun story of what happened.
Well, yeah. So I mean, when we were working in Albania, we were finding lots of shipwrecks until the Forney project. I'd never seen so many shipwrecks than Albania, because it's just the whole coastline is full of shipwrecks, and diving was outlawed under the dictatorship of Enver Hoxha. So you get shipwrecks in shallow waters that you don't get in the rest of the Mediterranean, because there's been so much looting following the advent of scuba around the rest of the Mediterranean. So Albania is pristine waters. And so we were diving kind of off of Saranda, which is kind of one of the major southern cities, which has a lengthy history. And so we were expecting we might find some shipwrecks. And so we were diving and swimming along, and I see one of these kind of big North African amphoras that carried garum, and they're kind of oblong with a pointed toe and really fat. And I go over to it, and I call my dive buddy over, and he's taking a look as well. We're trying to figure it out. And I start clearing off the sediment off the top of it. And I see these like orange streaks coming off in the kind of into the water column. And I'm like, that's really weird. And he's like getting ready. He's going to try and like see if he can move it to shift it so we can get a clear picture and everything. And I realized that's rust. There's rust coming off of this. This is not an amphora at all. It's just a very big bomb. And so I stop him. I said, don't touch it, don't touch it. And he did not understand what I was trying to say. And he just kept going. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to get out of here, because I am not going to hang around while this kind of explodes. And so I start swimming away, and he follows me, and he goes, what are you doing? And I go, bomb, bomb. And he's like, I don't know what that means. I said, go up to the surface. So we go up to the surface. And we tied off a line to it to kind of go up. And I was like, oh, this is how I die. And so we go up to the surface, and I go, that's a bomb. That's not an amphora. And he went, oh. And we look over, and like 50 meters away is the Probitas, which is a World War II Italian hospital ship that was bombed by the Germans. So after Italy capitulated in World War II, Germany started attacking the Italians because they surrendered. And so one of the things the Germans did is from Corfu, they would send bombers to attack the Italian ships that were in Albania. And they sunk this hospital ship in the harbor. And so we had found one of the anti-ship bombs that were dropped on this strafing run towards Probitas, and it hadn't gone off. And what had happened is it had fallen. And then over the years with the rust, the tail pieces and everything had fallen off. And it's the exact shape of an amphora.
So how did that story turn out? What did you have to to do? Who did you have
So
to
what we did
contact?
is we went and we told the Albanian government. I mean, we were working with the Albanian government, but we told their demining team. And so their demining team got really excited because they had just had a workshop with the American Navy demining group, and they came out and they brought some kind of underwater explosive, and they were going to blow it up in situ. Oh no, sorry, they were going to bring it out of the water, take it to a field, and blow it up in a field. And so we brought them to where it was. They dove down, and they were down there for like 45 seconds. They came right back up, and then they said something in Albanian, and our Albanian colleague turned to us and said, he says, "My fear is too great to touch it." So they left again, and then they came back with the underwater explosive and kind of rigged it up, and then moved all the boats in the harbor out of the way, and then blew it up. And it was this huge explosion. And so they blew it up in situ because it was one of the big ones. But we find bombs of all types underwater everywhere in the Mediterranean. I mean, these kind of big kind of round ones that are anti-ship ones. We find anti-tank mines a lot because they look like frisbees, and if you throw them out as they reach 2 atmospheres, they explode because the pressure is equal to a tank or enough to set them off. So kind of right before 2 atmospheres of depth, you find a lot of anti-tank mines that didn't quite get deep enough and hadn't exploded. So we find bombs all the time.
So, Peter, don't you think you need to have a signal for the word bomb at this point?
Yes, yes, that is a very good idea.
At
That's a
least
very good
decide
idea.
that, I mean, there's American Sign Language, there's different sign language. But just choose one.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, shark is really easy. Anyone can signal
Shark,
as a shark,
shark.
but bomb is a little bit harder. Yeah, we need to come up with something.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you have a signal for, hey, treasure, or some other sort of thing, gold or whatever? So, have you found what people would define as, treasures?
Yeah, never found anything that people would define as treasure. So the vast majority of ships in the past didn't carry anything of what we would consider precious metals or kind of what would have market value today, that sort of thing. um I mean, they're out there. You could argue that the Ulubrun ship, which dates to the Bronze Age, to I believe 1650 BC, could be categorized as, or sorry, 14. It might be 1450. I think Cape Caledonia is 1650. Anyway, could be categorized as a treasure galleon because it was loaded with all of these goods. It was a ship probably communicating between Egypt and Cyprus, and it sank off the coast of Turkey. It was carrying ivory and a bunch of different high value goods, copper and tin ingots. But I've never found anything like that. And I'm quite happy that we haven't, because as exciting as it is and like compelling in movies and that sort of thing, I've never found a shipwreck that hasn't been looted. So we have this big problem that kind of shipwreck discoveries peaked in the 1970s. They've been declining ever since. And so shipwrecks are a rapidly disappearing resource. And once they're gone, it's not like fish or kind of natural resources where if there's a conservation, then they can rebound. Once cultural resources are gone, they're gone forever. And shipwrecks have just been decimated. And decimated might not even be the right word, because it's far worse than decimation, which is what 1 in 10. I mean, it's quite dire. And so every single shipwreck we found in Forney and Albania as well, from freedivers and elsewhere, have evidence of looting. So I'm glad we haven't found any gold, because that would make things much worse. Once there's the kind of reports of gold and silver being found, that sort of thing, then kind of the looters descend. So it's much better to kind of tell these human stories around amphoras and millstones and those kind of everyday objects, rather than if we found even one gold coin, I'm sure that's what the headline would be on National Geographic and Smithsonian and all these different websites. And then who knows what would happen to all the rest of the sites. There's a lot of cases of people thinking that there's gold on some of these ancient shipwrecks of amphoras. And so rather than kind of look inside all the amphoras, they just dynamite them. So you find dynamited wrecks everywhere where just everything's destroyed, and they go looking for the gold. And of course, there was none. There never was any to begin with.
The amphora themselves are treasures to historians, like me, because that's the evidence we're looking for in terms of the trade routes, like what type of amphora they are. As you said, garum trade. Like, wow, okay. So these days, of course, when I explain garum to people, unless they're Asian, they usually don't get it. I'm like, oh, fish sauce is used quite frequently in the Philippines and Vietnam, and some other
Exactly.
right? And
And it's quite similar from what I understand. The fish sauce in Asia is quite similar to the Roman fish sauce. So you can sometimes see people just depicting the Roman fish sauce as kind of more like what we call salsa menta, and it's like chunks of fish and that sort of thing. But from the ancient accounts, it seems like it's more of a fine, clear liquid, very similar to the fish sauce used in Asia. And yeah, I mean, it's a great food additive, which is how it was used.
I had recently seen a chef who had gotten all excited about fish sauce, and it was a big deal for a while. I have to look at the article again sometime. But uh, the idea that garum was the origin for the modern fish sauce used today is something that I'm pondering, because it's possible, because like, okay, the Roman times, then it went to Spain and it went to the Philippines because we were colonized. I mean, why not? I don't know. That's one route.
It could also have gone the other way, just because so I mean the Romans were complaining that so much of their wealth was going into the Indian Ocean, that all of the wealth of the Roman Empire was going to the Indian Ocean because there was such demand for all the products coming from the Indian Ocean. So lots of high value goods were coming from the Indian Ocean over, and then precious metals and other goods were going from the Mediterranean into the Indian Ocean. And so there were extensive trade routes throughout the Indian Ocean. And so, yeah, maybe some of those ideas and products and things traveled east. It certainly could be.
There are certain rabbit holes like that I have tagged, like things to research someday when I have time. That's like one of them, like fish sauce, origin of, because for instance, tilapia, I didn't realize, I think of it as like the national Filipino fish, but it's like it ancient Egypt had it.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, I'm like, really? Tilapia? I'm like, wow, that's really wild. When I was researching ancient Egyptian culture, I think 2 years ago now, when I was um, when I was supposed to present an ancient Egyptian music for AIA Honolulu, me, Peter, by now, I don't just sit there and go look at music. I look at the whole culture. I look at the whole package. I look at everything. And I did that for 3 months, which is like nothing compared to the lifetime people spend, looking at stuff. But looking at the artwork one day, I was like, what is that? It's fish. What is it? It says tilapia. What the heck? And I
Yeah.
looked into it. I'm like, that is really wild. So,
Yeah.
where did something come from is a very big rabbit hole. And it's going to drive a lot of people crazy when they start thinking about the whole idea of stringed instruments, for instance, like,
Right.
yeah, because you're thinking, so the Chinese culture has had stringed instruments for how long? And then the Scottish people had it for how long? Their harps. And how long did the Mediterranean cultures, and then you go to the Near East, like, and all you have, the only evidence you have really in the end is the relics and um,
Mm.
the artwork. But that doesn't, the artwork depicts that they had it, that they were playing it. The relics is showing like how long they've had it. So, but unfortunately, relics, it's wood. The instruments are made of wood. They corrode. They just.
Right.
It's very hard to find these things, and so you just because you found something that was 2400 BC someplace doesn't mean that that is the place, the origin, because then all that means is then you start looking at the other cultures and digging around and trying to figure out if it exists there at that time
Yep.
frame, right? But
Exactly.
but in a
Yeah.
different shape, and because it could be a different shape and made of a different thing. For instance, if it's made of silk, the strings could be made of silk. That was gone. I don't know how long silk lasts, but not as long as like gut strings, or I think
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure. That sort of things. I can only imagine
Yep.
that when you're in the sea. I mean, there are very few things that last, right? So,
Yeah, it really depends on kind of the conditions. So kind of at sea we have comparable things to like Egypt where it's dry desert so things preserve really well. And kind of our ocean analog to that would be the Black Sea because below a certain depth it's anoxic, so there's no oxygen. So nothing can live down there. Uh, so there's no fish, but there's also none of the smaller creatures that like to eat wood and that sort of thing. So, they found just these just incredibly well preserved ships that look like they were sailing yesterday at the bottom of the Black Sea because nothing can eat it. And then, the Mediterranean, nothing really survives that's organic unless it gets buried very quickly. Again, no oxygen kind of under the sediment. But you have to remove all the sediment that's on top and then all the cargo and everything like that to get below. Um, so I haven't heard of anyone finding any instruments on board shipwrecks, but I'm sure that there were. I'm sure they existed.
they
It's
must have
just really,
traveled, right? I mean,
yep,
somewhere someone said, "I want that instrument. Can you give me like five of those for my household?" And
yeah,
it traveled by ship, right? It's not. You can't
yeah,
always travel by land, but like how they're gone. Like
yes.
unless you find them, perhaps like you said, in the Black Sea someplace, that would be awesome.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the mariners used instruments while they were traveling and that sort of thing. So I'm sure they were there, but it's really rare. It's like, um, they must have had animals on board these ships as well, not just as foodstuffs, but as pets. And so we only have insight into this from a shipwreck that was found in Pisa, the Alkidos. So the seagull is the name of the ship, and it sank during what was probably a tsunami, and it sank in a river and was quickly covered by sediment, and so it was really really well preserved. And on board that they found a rope, and then sitting on one side of the rope there was all of this cat hair from what we would today call a Russian gray. And so they must have had a cat on board the ship that was just kind of sitting up there and then kind of escaped when the tsunami came or something. And on one of the other ships, they actually found it had been crushed by the tsunami, and the cargo had fallen on top of a mariner and his dog. So because of those kind of like Pompeii-like preservation by the tsunami, we know that there were cats and dogs as pets on board these vessels. But we haven't found any evidence of that elsewhere. It's just because of that like really exceptional preservation.
And and plant transport, right? That now, and the Polynesians had brought plants with them when they were going and trying to find new
Exactly.
land, right? Um,
Yep.
but I mean, we know that from I forgot how I know that. I used to really I cared very much about finding out about Polynesian history for a while. But that was one of the facts that I found to be really intelligent to me.
Mhm.
Like, oh, okay, that's great. You like certain plants, you want to make sure that these are found in your new world. Awesome. Um, but it's not as far back in history as obviously as like Bronze Age stuff. So I would be so curious to know about things like transporting plants, flowers that they like into someplace else. Because I know that that's an instinct a lot of people still have now, like seeds at least.
Mhm.
plant some of these flowers, plant some of these vegetables, you know. Um,
Yeah, I mean, you certainly, if you're going to move somewhere else, you don't want to not have your favorite breadfruit or your favorite herbs and spices and that sort of thing. And so you bring them with you. And so that's like a great proxy for maritime trade, is finding plants that originate somewhere else, but then are found along these kind of maritime routes. And also kind of inadvertently as well, not necessarily on purpose. I mean, one of my favorite stories is that the medieval and Renaissance Colosseum, after it had fallen into disrepair, was the most biologically diverse place in Europe, because it had all of these flora that were growing from all over the former Roman Empire. And so, kind of as gladiators and slaves and animals were brought from all over the reaches of the empire to the Colosseum to fight and to entertain, seeds that they carried with them in their gut or in their hair or fur dropped off into the Colosseum and then kind of laid dormant. And then as the Colosseum was abandoned, they started to flower. And so there's something like over 600 different types of plants and flowers that could be found in the Renaissance Colosseum. And unfortunately, under Mussolini, he cleaned all of that out. And then you have kind of the sterile stone structure that you see today, which is still impressive architecture. But just imagine if you could visit this kind of beautiful garden of a Colosseum that was full of kind of examples of the flora of the entire empire.
um, After our conversation, you know, if you could find some resource links for me about that, that sounds so fun.
Yeah, there's a wonderful kind of Renaissance book that actually he went through and he cataloged all of the different plants and illustrated them.
That's amazing. See, that's the sort of thing that I wouldn't expect that a maritime archaeologist and I would be talking about. But here we are. So, you know, awesome. If you can remember the name of that book, Peter, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because, you know,
absolutely.
when somebody's studying the Colosseum, there's more to the Colosseum than just, okay, yeah, and then they fought. The gladiators fought, and then it was great. You know, it's like, okay, and then after that, the afterlife of the Colosseum after the gladiators had done their thing, you know, what happened then, and what purpose
Exactly.
it served. You know, people lived there for a while. Uh,
Well, yeah, and that's all a very human story. And
yeah,
so I've been a big proponent of sites, leaving sites to nature rather than kind of making them static archaeological sites, because you can clear off all of the overburden, all the plants and everything, and just see the building foundations. But you're making interpretive um uh conclusions about that as well, and you're making it into something um that in your mind you're fitting to a narrative, but you're creating a site itself. And so I think that people learn a lot more from seeing a site kind of in nature than they do as a site, as like a sterile static archaeological site. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said of visiting sites like Termessos in Turkey, which is kind of left to its own. You kind of wander up this mountain, and it's just kind of a city in the jungle, and you can really feel the time. Like you feel the ages around you. Whereas I think if you visit some sites that are so heavily cared for and prepared and kind of it's just stone and nothing but stone, um, it can feel very manufactured and kind of overly cared for. And you don't have the same kind of connection to deep time that you can kind of experience at a site like Termessos.
I recently went to Delphi, and just going up and up and up there just to just see this sacred site. I look around and I'm just awed by the place, the all the mountains, and I'm just thinking it's really amazing. I can only imagine what it was like for people that were living there at the time.
Yeah.
to go and visit, like the trek you take to go to a temple. Um, it's amazing. I'm thinking like when people go on a ship back then to visit a particular place to go for when they talk about visiting Apollo's shrine here just to hear the Pythia in that
Mhm.
place, or to hear the Sibyl in another location. And I'm looking at the map going, wow, you okay? For you, that was a month, 2 months travel just to do that, and then it's not like it's on the beach. They're
Mhm.
usually like you have to then go trek and make a climb, unless you send a
Yeah.
messenger up there. It's really incredible when I think of
And
travel.
even today, with, I mean, sure, there's a parking lot and you can take cars to get there, but you have to still walk up, and it's still an experience. And that's, I mean, that's one of the things I really enjoy about underwater archaeology, is that even if you have a known site that has conservation work and that sort of thing, it's still an experience. And I think it still gets you, you feel a connection to the if it's a shipwreck, the ancient mariners, because I mean, you can often, I mean, if it's you're on cliffs and that sort of thing, you know that it did not end well probably for them. That place where we have all those shipwrecks in Forney, I mean, it's just cliffs for kilometers, and so there's just no escaping. I mean, they did not get out, and so you have a connection. And every shipwreck has marine life and that sort of thing, and so yeah, you have this experience that if you visit the Parthenon marbles in the British Museum, it's such a sterile environment. You know, it's just not the same as visiting like the Acropolis and experiencing the context and all of that. So yeah, I think we are very fortunate in maritime archaeology that with shipwrecks, we kind of get that sort of sensory experience every single time.
Um, so now I'm thinking the last subject here, monsters. Okay, you don't you haven't seen any, Peter, I know, or else that would be a big news someplace. Twitter. Look, we found a monster. Um, we always get excited, in our household when we hear about like giant squid uh,
Mm-hmm.
sightings and giant squid here and there. Um, what is the biggest sea creature you've seen, either with the robots that you sent out there or you physically have seen?
Well, I think, well, there's a lot of just interesting things in the sea, and we are quite noisy, bumbling creatures when we go down underwater. So all the smart things stay far away. And so you do have a lot of curious creatures that, like, you'll go down and you'll look all around and you won't see anything. And then all of a sudden you'll just feel something over your shoulder and you'll turn around and it'll be like a shark or a barracuda or an alligator if you're in the southern US. So I mean, there's a lot of creatures that are curious about us and really aren't as dangerous as advertised on Shark Week. um so yeah, I mean, there's lots of those sorts of creatures. um I completely understand like the fear of giant squid and that sort of thing, because certainly the octopuses that are kind of ubiquitous on archaeological sites are very kind of clever little troublemakers who will steal anything that's not tied down. They love grabbing things and pulling them into their dens. And I've had like pencils and rulers and all kinds of stuff stolen by octopuses who pull them into their dens. Um, so I've never seen any monsters, but I can definitely understand how ancient people perceive monsters. So I was working on a sailing vessel, the Roseway, a number of years ago now. We were sailing in the North Atlantic, and I was on night watch, and I looked down into the water, and I could just see these like dragons swirling all around the boat, and it was really shocking. I mean, it was just it was one of those moments where you just like you can't breathe, and it took me several minutes to realize what was happening. But for those of you who haven't kind of spent a lot of time at sea at night, if it's a moonless night and you go into the ocean and you move your hand around in the water, you'll see this kind of efflorescence from these marine species. They kind of fluoresce when there's movement, and they're kind of everywhere. And so you can sometimes see them in waves, but really if you go swimming at night in a moonless night, they're really, really bright in the water. So you move your hand through the water, and there's kind of a trail of fluorescence behind your hand. And so what we were seeing was there was a pod of dolphins swimming along with the boat in the dead of night, and their noses, as soon as their noses would hit, the bioluminescent creatures would fluoresce and then kind of trail off. And so I was seeing the front of the nose and head of the dolphin, and then these long tails. And so as they kind of swam around the boat, they were creating these like dragon shapes. And I could completely understand if like ancient mariners saw that and thought there were like sea monsters at sea. And you spend enough time at sea, and there's just things that you can't explain and that you don't understand, which all have, a easy thing, but your eyes can deceive you. There's all kinds of just amazing things that you see out there. I saw a moonbow one time, and so it was a rainbow, but at night, illuminated by the moon, and it was just shades of gray. So it was just, there's no colors, but just shades of gray. And it was just one of the strangest things I've ever seen. And so I have never seen any monsters, but I will say I have seen something monstrous, and that is that every single dive anywhere in the world I've gone, I've seen plastics all over the seafloor, and there's just no escaping it. And you look at things like the Great Garbage Patch, it's the size of France, but it's all plastics in the Pacific Ocean. And it's 10,000 miles away from the nearest land. And so you have the largest archaeological deposit in the world, and it's floating at sea far from any land. So, the human impact on the oceans is monstrous. So there's no sea monsters other than our impact on the planet.
Any siren sounds, any possible sounds that could possibly be something that people could interpret as that? Like, I can imagine something echoing in a cave someplace, maybe, but any thoughts on that? Like, what the heck?
Science, I'm not sure, but perceptions really are key when you're at sea, and so you're constantly making adjustments. So ships can't drive like a car, so you're constantly working. There's this tension between the vessel and the water and the atmosphere, and so you're listening for any changes in the wind, any changes in the sea state, the waves, the color of the water, and sounds. Smells are really important. You can often smell land before you see it. And if you're traveling at night, you're trying to smell the land because you're probably not going to be able to see it. Land is usually spotted at night from the absence of stars. So kind of where the land is blocking. So, I completely understand that, sirens and other types of sensory perception are really important. The sirens themselves may not have been real, but there's things that may have been described, various sensory perceptions that might have caused people to think of sirens and that sort of stuff. I mean, obviously, Scylla and Charybdis were based on kind of the Strait of Messina and the whirlpool that can form there. The Chimera off the coast of Turkey was this kind of natural gas fissure that would catch fire, and mariners could see it from quite far away. They just see this fire on land in the distance. So I think all of these things are based on real things. But perceptions of the natural environment that you would perceive at sea. And so maybe the sirens, who knows, were the sound of something on land at night, and passing by, you could hear it. And if you got too close, you'd be smashed into the rocks.
Well, I was just thinking when you were describing all these shipwrecks around a particular area, and they're caused by natural factors. I'm thinking exactly that, like a wind that's so loud that it starts doing all sorts of different tonalities, and they're saying it's the sirens, they're calling us, they're going to smash against the rocks though to around, don't listen, something like that, right? Like,
It could be, yeah. I mean, straits are really dangerous,
yeah,
and so you often have kind of rocky outcrops and that sort of thing. And straits are where kind of the limitless power of the atmosphere and the limitless power of the ocean are forced into a very constrained environment, and so they're always the most dangerous. And so maybe the sirens were some strait somewhere where the wind is hurtling through a narrow pass and the ships have to sail through there, and kind of as the wind gets forced through the rocks or trees or whatever else, it caused the sound.
there's always the dolphins too, though. Like,
Yes, that's true.
I'm thinking like the dolphins, uh, chitter, whenever I've heard them, and I'm guessing they chitter everywhere. It's not just like at the beach locations or whatever, right? So, were they making those sounds too when you what? I mean, did they give themselves away that they were dolphins by making those sounds?
I didn't hear them on that one. Um, um, yeah, no, they didn't make any sounds when I saw them that night. But yeah, I mean, dolphins were perceived as kind of something beneficial and positive. Mariners have often kind of seen dolphins as friends. Some cultures see them as spirits of mariners that are kind of reincarnated or have passed into the ocean. So dolphins are generally seen as a positive feature within the maritime landscape.
Peter, I'd love to keep talking to you, but I've already kept you for like 2 hours. I think, or like an hour and a half or something. Believe it or not, I knew that I would just kind of keep talking with you, and I'd be keeping you back from the things that you have to do. But one last story, please, just for this episode. Do you have like a favorite recent or even something from long ago story about a dive where you found something that you were actually looking for. You were looking for an amphora. You were looking for something, and you ended up finding it.
Yeah, so off the coast of Sicily, we have kind of this long running project with RPM Nautical Foundation and the Soprintendenza del Mare, looking for the ancient Roman naval battle, the Battle of the Egadi Islands, which occurred on March 10th, 241 BC, between Rome and Carthage. We've been working there for 16 years now, and I'm leaving tomorrow to go to it for the next season. And yeah, so 2 years ago we were looking for these kind of big bronze rams, and several have been found over the intervening years, being a long running project. And but prior to this project, only two of these bronze rams had been found anywhere in the world. And so kind of several had been found over the course of the battle, but this one day we kind of went down, and we had found one the day before, and so we were going to go down and try and record it with the cameras of the robot. And so the robot went down. We were kind of in the middle of the ocean, went down, and we went, oh, there it is. There's the ram that we found yesterday. And then Matt, our one of the archaeologists and kind of the guy who runs the survey, said, no, we're not in the right location. And we looked, and it was a completely different ram. And we had just dropped the robot down on a completely different site. The actual ram that we had found the day before was 50 meters away. And we turned the camera, we could see it sitting over there. And there's happened to be another one sitting right there. We're like, that's strange. And so we did a sweep of the sonar. And all of a sudden we saw all of these targets in the sonar, which is a sound system. So, think of like Hunt for the Red October and the pinging of the the sonar on that. We were hitting all of these targets on the sonar map, and we ended up finding 5 rams that day, and they're all in this area of the battle. And so that's where we can search the seafloor for weeks and weeks and weeks in this scatter of the battlefield and find no rams. And it hadn't been a very profitable year up to that point. We hadn't found any rams until we found that one, and then all of a sudden we found 5 more. So I mean, it ended up being the best season yet. That's the kind of thing where you just never know. You can go weeks and weeks and weeks of finding nothing but mud, and then it just takes one really good day to just have a spectacular discovery.
I can't imagine ending this episode on a better note than that, than some sort of hope. Some hope for the future for everybody.
Yes.
It's like Exactly that. You know, you could be working on something, looking for something for a long time, not finding it, and then suddenly it's all there. And it's like,
Mhm.
you got to celebrate that moment. And you must have been so happy. And
Yeah, it was absolutely incredible, and I'm sure that will never happen again. It was just once in a lifetime.
that is such a cool story. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Peter. And wow, so after your new set of adventures, you know, I'm going to have to bug you a few months later and say, so, can you tell us about it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Peter. Thank you so much. Well, you have a great rest of your evening. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. You stay on after I say goodbye. So, bye, everyone, and see you next time. See you next time, Peter.